popcorn.
Really entertaining.
Or I've got a really bad reputation for going super long. All right, he's got to be done in an hour.
Bring food.
Bring the snack.
Anything
Bring the
sandwiches.
snack. Exactly. Yeah, I guess when somebody brings a cooler and sets up a picnic, that's my first clue that perhaps I am going over too far.
Monopoly game.
It gets to a sleeping bag that you really have to be concerned.
Right. And it's always a problem for me because I highly value being prompt and accurate with time schedules, but I'm also obviously rabbit holes are not something that I can avoid. That's right.
I had to go down to the courthouse years ago for something, and there was a jury selection for a murder trial, and it'd been going on for a week. And these people, there was several dozen people. There's
Right.
yeah, and they had Monopoly games, they had chess
I believe
games.
it.
I mean, they were in there all day, every day. There's jury selection.
No self-respecting jury would ever take me. No wise attorney would want me on the jury. Well, we're getting close. One more minute. You're alive now, though, so whatever you say
And be
can be heard elsewhere. I don't know if we're going to hold anything against anybody here, but we can document it.
So am I the person that has to slide the phone over when it's time?
Yes, but anybody that thinks of it at that moment. I don't know if she's trying to get people quieted down. People, you mean granddaughter. Yeah, I don't know if I know Tom will be in, but we're live now. It's 11 a.m. So I will mention to the Facebook folks, we don't have Tom monitoring today, so certainly appreciate your input. We'll try to catch it, keep track of the comments that come in, but they'll be there for others to see as well. We're going to look at Matthew chapter 6 today. I expanded what we're going to look at. I'm going to start with verse 16. Yesterday, the messages started at verse 25. But I'm going to start at verse 16 because it touches a couple of things that I think are important in terms of, especially in terms of the overall theme of salt and light. I think both these things, both the passage about fasting and treasures in heaven, really inform our witness in a powerful way, as do all of these. Well, let me pray first, then we'll start teaching. God, we just ask that you would be at the forefront, that you would rise to the surface, that you would help us to listen to your voice, that you might speak to each one of us in perhaps a different way, but according to what we each need. And that's the miracle and the beauty of your word, its richness and its potential for giving us life is a wonderful thing. And we thank you for that and pray that you would accept this as a blessing. Amen. So the Sermon on the Mount, the Sermon on the Plain, the Beatitudes, those passages can be seen from a lot of different perspectives. And again, I have said this and will continue to say regarding Bible study, it depends what lens you're using to view the text, to what jumps out at you. And never should, there are invalid ways to interpret a text. There are times that we do, that we put into a text something that we want it to say, and we use it in ways that God doesn't intend it. That does happen. However, if we try not to, and if we're sincere about Bible study, God does guide us, and he's not typically going to let us get that far off track if we truly want to hear what he has to say. However, anybody who is sitting down to read scripture is using context to interpret it. I mean, all language derives meaning from context. It's not like numbers. Numbers have absolute value. Language doesn't. And because context matters, the way we see a particular passage has an impact on how we understand it. So while there are there is guidance here for how we are to conduct our lives in the sense that we want to do what is pleasing to God. But for the context, for the purpose of this series, looking at salt and salt and light being the thing that we offer to the world. That this is what we have. Like, why would anybody adopt this Christian way of life? Why would anyone want to give their lives to Christ? That's what the salt and light piece is about. We're supposed to be showing others what it means. It's not about staying out of trouble, and it's not about obeying laws. It's about witness. And I say that that's valid because at the end of his time on earth, the very final command, even after Jesus says, my a new command I give you, that you will love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. Even after that, before he leaves in Acts, he says, you're now going to go be my witnesses. Witnesses, a central part of what we're called to do. And the idea of salt and light, the information that is given to us here, is a way for us to witness. It's a way for us to show the world that our God is worth following. And so from that regard, looking at some of the things like fasting, Lynn, we're starting in Matthew 6 at verse 16, fasting. The message is started at 25, but I'm going back a little bit farther than that for this morning. So I'll read a bit about fasting and just keep in mind, what does this mean in terms of our witness to the world, our being salt and light in the world? When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show men that they are fasting. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, pour oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to men that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. So that's that first chunk about fasting. Let's talk about that. Comments?
Well, I think it's like what you just said. If our witness is our life, if we're going around looking sad all the time, looking like we're starved to death, looking like we're in pain, that's not a good witness.
Right. Who wants that, God?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. We don't, and it's not misleading.
Right.
I think that I think that there needs to be always a concern that our actions in witnessing are sincere. That doesn't mean we're going to be perfect, but I don't want to. And we see if you look at, well, we won't go there all the way. In Acts chapter 8, we have this Simon the magician who says, "Hey, listen, you guys are making all kinds of life changes for people," and he's thinking, "You know what? I should get baptized," because his end game is, I can then confer the Holy Spirit by laying on hands, and that really makes a difference. But what we see in Simon the magician is he's gone through the motions of participating in baptism and even professing faith, but it hasn't been sincere. And at the end of the day, Peter says, "Listen, we'll pray for you, because you have not connected with God." So it's appropriate for us to make sure that these things, like not disfiguring ourselves, not looking somber, that we not certainly it's self-serving. If we put on the suffering servant face, people will have compassion on us and they'll respect us and all kinds of things. So we don't want that, but at the same time, we don't want to fake that we're feeling okay and fast and make that be we're trying to lead people to Christ about something that we don't believe. Because what happens here, the key piece is the issue of reward. The issue of reward. When you fast, don't look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure your faces to show men they are fasting. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, pour oil on your head and wash your face so that it will not be obvious to men that you're fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. There's a personal benefit that comes from the observance of these things when we do the right things for the right reason. And one of the ways that I can wrap my mind around it is having the blessed privilege of raising 3 children. At every stage when they were younger, every one of them at some point wanted to give gifts to us. And those gifts began with simply a heartfelt desire to give us a gift. Very little awareness of what we might actually use or want, but none of those things came into play. But what they wanted more than anything else was when they gave the gift to someone to see that it was a blessing to them. They simply wanted it to make a difference. They weren't looking to garner favor with us. You know, they weren't trying to bribe us. They weren't just going through the motions, you know, that society expects. They really, what they had to offer, they were concerned only that we like it. Somebody else could like it. You know, it would be nice if a teacher or somebody said, "Oh, that's lovely. It'd be nice to give to your dad." And it would be discouraging to them if, when they were making their gift, their product, whatever it was they were choosing, if somebody said to them, "No one's going to like that." Yeah, that would be discouraging. But the truth is, what all they really cared about was that the one getting the gift would appreciate it. And that's really when it talks about our reward, what Jesus is trying to get us to see is that this is about us and God. And it is a personal thing in the same sense that my kids could draw a picture for me and it would be a huge blessing to me. And anybody else looking at it might say, "Oh, okay, kindergarten or first grade? Which when did that one come out?" You know, and it have no real artistic value necessarily, but the only thing that it was personal between them and me, and another kid doing that same picture, copying that same picture. If you know, Jeff and I are in first grade together, and we're writing cards to our parents, and Jeff writes one to his parents, says, you know, "These are all the things I think about you," and comes back the next day and says, "Oh, my mom and dad loved it." If I plagiarize that card, take that same text, put it on a card to my parent, is that really likely? My parents might say, "Oh, that's wonderful. What did you think of this? And why do you call me Dale?" You know, they might still appreciate the intent, but the reality is it's not the same. And you know, Jesus is clear here that we do these things in the context of a relationship, and we receive the reward eternally, not instantly. And so how does that impact those that we witness to?
My version has one extra word, but then it said, your Father who sees you will reward you openly. Now,
Uh-huh.
to me, that means you will, instead of looking like you're sad, it will look like you're happy.
Uh-huh.
And I've never really done a long fast, but I know that I've done 3 days, and after the third day, I really start feeling good.
Yeah.
And not hungry.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, that's saying the other word, I like the hypocrite, because, you talk about
Yeah.
you're faking it. Well, the hypocrite is a mask.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
when you're putting something on, putting on airs, you're doing something like that.
Yeah.
You're masking your true feelings.
What is the verse that the hypocrites receive? When it says they will receive their reward in full, what is it?
People feel sorry for them.
Yeah, it's the awe, it's the perspective, the attention.
The reward is actually the human reward.
Right.
Yes,
Nothing from God.
nothing from God.
So it's like, does that mean they're believers, but they're just off? I didn't understand. Okay.
If you think about it, I mean, if you take it to a negative extreme, if you take an individual who is constantly complaining about how sick they are and how hard things go for them and everything else, the world around them might not, at some point, everybody might say they're hypochondriac, they're making this all up. However, their reason for doing it is to get attention. And if that's what their purpose is to get attention, which is why else would you fast?
And the, and
You
the
know?
Jews that were trying to live by the law
Right.
saw them as something special, and
Right.
yeah, there's your reward.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you get the attention, you get merit points for fasting because wow, not everybody is fasting. It was fasting was a personal choice. There were many times that were noted as times to fast, but unlike Islam, which comes much later than this, there isn't a prescribed period or season of fasting where everyone would be fasting around you. There are many reasons, but it wouldn't be collective. And when talking about the reward, it says will reward you or reward you openly. I think the key piece there is whether others see it or not, or whether it's now or later, is less important than you'll know that what you're doing in secret is not going to get a secret reward. And it's important that we understand this. It isn't an issue necessarily in Matthew's gospel, but as Christianity begins to grow and popularize, the idea of hidden truths and special societies and secret knowledge called Gnosticism now, we look back at it. But this notion that there are insiders, that there are special people who get access to things that nobody else gets access to, really important that we not in any way allow that there's a secret class of people in faith. When he says he'll reward you, you'll know it, and others might know it as well. It won't be a reward that you're expected to hide, and it may be a reward, as we know that in the next passage, that will come in the future.
Well, it really kind of rings of the passage you said in Luke, where Jesus says, when you pray, go into your room, shut the door, and pray in secret. It's really saying the same thing here.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Because thinking about it, Jesus knows who we are. This is one of the things that's really powerful about the incarnation. Here we have a man who's an adult. He understands what public opinion is. He understands the pressure of being in public and doing things that other people notice and doing them for the wrong reason. He understands the temptation to dramatics. He's been healing people all over the place, but the one thing he never does is snap his fingers and heal the town. It's always a personal interchange. He could have had huge following and respect by just using a little bit of his God power in a broad sense. Let's heal everybody of leprosy everywhere in the kingdom. Nobody ever hears another thing about leprosy ever again. But that's not, so Jesus is aware of these dynamics as the God incarnate, which at least for me, it's easier for me to hear from a person that was a man that walked this earth that says, listen, I get it. I know why you don't, I know the temptation to do these things and appear to be religious. I get that that's there. And so we're getting that teaching. So let's move on to the next section, the treasures in heaven, to go through verse 24.
I'm feeling guilty with a thing of popcorn in front of me. Talking about
You're not bad.
Thanks,
fasting.
Gail.
Well, they would count a fast day as sundown to sundown, so you can still fast today. Just don't eat popcorn after the sun goes down.
The only time Julie.
I was gonna say that's the main guy. Exactly. I thought the same thing. Wait a minute. Doesn't the sun have to go down? That's why they darken movie theaters, right? So you can eat popcorn. 19 to 24 is where we're going now. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are bad, your whole your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? And then finally, no one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money, or mammon in some translations. Comments on treasures.
A little note on verse 23 is that the Greek for unhealthy here implies stingy. It says,
Yeah.
and in verse 22, it says the Greek for healthy here implies generous. So it's using the same word, but it's complete opposites.
Huh. Have to look at
Well,
that.
no, it says unhealthy.
Unhealthy.
Oh, healthy and unhealthy. Okay.
Yeah, that makes
So-
sense.
That makes
Yeah,
sense.
that does make sense.
So they're saying if your eyes are healthy, is that where you,
Yeah.
I have good, I don't know where that word would fit into the.
Yeah.
Your whole body
If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light.
Your eyes are unhealthy, which is stingy.
Yeah. Your whole body will be full of
But I never
darkness.
really understood the eye references here, and I still, like, I get the first two, the first paragraph, the third paragraph. of the
Yeah.
question. But the second one about the eye, especially since talking about the lamp earlier, and that you don't want to put it under a basket, you want to let your light shine.
Uh-huh.
The thing about the eyes, I'm just not sure. Is it
Yeah.
that people see your face through your eyes? I'm not sure, I don't have any notes on there.
The eye, I will look at it and see, but
No,
The-
the eye is a lamp of the body. It's kind of like, the saying that, the eyes are the window to the soul.
Right, right.
Hey.
Is it what you're looking at or what people are looking at you?
yeah, I think this passage really relies heavily on the one that comes before and after it. Don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth. These are tangible things. Your eye, if your eye is a lamp of your body, a good eye recognizes the truth that you either have a reward now on earth or a reward then in heaven. That when it says, when he says, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth, the good eye will understand what those treasures are that are earthly. A good eye will understand that moth and rust destroy, that things get lost, that people can steal. All those things are true about, regardless of how permanent we think something is. If it's physical, it's impermanent. At the same time, those things that are intangible, the things that we receive a heavenly reward for, we cannot see specifically. So it's, you can see things physically, and if you get focused on that, you're locked into a physical world. But a healthy eye, if the eye is the lamp of the body, if it's letting in the truth, then we recognize the difference in value. That heavenly treasure, those things that endure, we recognize those as having that value. And although they're not tangible, it takes the, maybe a way to describe it is to say, if you spiritually recognize the value of helping another person, not because that person thanks you or because people respect you, but because God's made it possible for you to offer that assistance or make that gift or give that witness, or like the Good Samaritan, taking care of the wounds of another, recognizing what's more valuable, is maybe, I don't know if that helps at all then or not, but
There's a note in my Bible that says the good eye looks to God as its master and fills the person with light. It's the lamp, it says lamp, it's going inward, like you said. The bad eye looks to treasures on earth and admits only the darkness of greed and self-interest. The person's whole life will be determined by the kind of light the eye lets in. So it's like, where are you looking? Are you looking toward God, or are you looking toward mammon?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
whatever.
I've never understood that.
It's kind of like the good wolf and the bad wolf. It's
Yeah.
which one you feed.
Yeah.
And it is right.
What do people say, did we not prophesy in your name and da 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 da? And he says, depart from me, I never knew you.
Right.
They were doing it for the wrong reasons.
You do good, but for the wrong reason.
The other thing, when I look at the, so you can, in many languages, you can look at semantic domains, which are the group of words that refer to certain things, and understanding semantic domains gives you an idea, for instance, of when you look at this word for eye, is it a word for eye that is used in the semantic domain of parts of the body, or the perception that goes with eye? This particular word is connected with the idea of understanding. It's not, it doesn't come from the semantic domain of body parts. It comes from the semantic domain of what you see. One way to describe it is something that is in sight versus out of sight. So you think of out of sight, out of mind. Think of insight, out of sight. That's the context of this sight, of this word eye that's translated. This word that's translated eye here, or what you're aware of, or what you're paying attention to. So maybe that helps. So let's talk about the treasures in heaven.
Well, that verse 21, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So nowadays they say follow the money.
Yeah.
Where your money goes is where your heart is.
Yeah. I think that's, I think it's really valuable to take that insight and ask ourselves, where am I investing? Because it isn't so much how much I give. Again, this comes to the widow's mite.
Right.
It isn't how much I give. It is, this story, this observation, where you store up things, that's where your heart is. That is a direct connection to the widow's mite. When Jesus says, look at this widow, she's put in the only penny she had. It's not that her virtue comes from not giving the gift, but the fact that the only way she could have done that, the only reasonable, rational, understandable motivation that she would have for doing that is a complete trust that God's going to provide. Her heart is firmly grounded in heaven. It isn't about generosity. It isn't about sacrifice. It's about trusting her king to be her king.
Right.
And that's where her heart is. It's not, when Jesus talks about that, a rich person could give a widow's mite if it's given in the sense that, for instance, God's going to use that to bless another. Then you can still have that heart that God is your king. But that's the key, the centerpiece of this is that same connection to the widow's mite. It is where we spend our money, which is difficult for us to part with. I mean, that's the truth. Where we spend our money has to be informed by who our king is. And it's their reward in heaven. The thing that I have to remind myself of often is, as tangible and as real as Christ is to me, and as meaningful as my faith is to me in day-to-day life, this reward in heaven is still something I can't imagine. It's still way better, as much as I can imagine that God does. And I can say, honestly, when I look back over the life of my faith, the number of places that I've seen God active and been able to appreciate and experience that have been multiplied. And I know that I see God in more places and in more ways now than I did 30 years ago or even 50 years ago. But I have to remind myself that reward in heaven is one that's in the future guaranteed, but it's also guaranteed to be so mind-boggling, I can't imagine it. I can't know what it might be about. It is a really vague term. There are times that we're given very specific outcomes for our obedience. That it's not always a hidden thing. But in this case, this notion of treasure, you know, treasure is not what we use to pay for our day-to-day life. Treasure is what we rely on for blessing and influence and security. This is something that we value higher than a wage, I guess is a better way of saying it. Treasure has a different value than a wage. It's not something you earn. It's something you discover, something you're given, something you stumble onto. Inheritance is kind of like it, but not really. So there's this thing held for me in heaven that is so phenomenal, I can't imagine it. And I need not to forget that. I need not to. It's, you know what I'm saying, that it's kind of a paradox that on the one hand, as my faith becomes more real to me and as I experience it in more real ways, I also run the risk of thinking that I know everything God's going to do. that I understand, I understand more now than I did 30 years ago, but I'm still so far away from knowing the whole picture that I've got to remember that this treasure in heaven is something that I can't grasp. I can't begin to grasp it. And we see that in other places where the heavens are referred to in apocalyptic text, in apocalyptic literature, in Revelation, other places. Usually, what we're told is, it's got like 7 heads and 9. Anyway, I can't describe it to you fully. The things that are perceived as being in heaven or from heaven are things that are really difficult to bring back into human language. And again, why is that? Because human language requires context for meaning. And we don't have the context for God's kingdom. We don't have the context for a place in human existence that is free of sin. And so we don't know what uncorrupted looks like. We haven't any way to grasp. And at the very least, whatever my reward in heaven is, it will be uncorrupted. And that piece I can never know. And that's why I have to trust that it's going to be available.
Not only uncorrupted, but incorruptible.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. When I talk about context, it's not just the non-corrupting of the item, but it's not in a context of corruptibility. There's nothing to corrupt it.
We can't even imagine that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We've never met an uncorrupted person or an uncorrupted thing.
But if you think about it, as we're talking about it, we talk about what that treasure is. There's a part of me that says, that might just be the only thing that I need. The absence of corruptibility. Like everything else could pale in, because everything I know is corrupted. If all that changes is a potential for corruptibility, but everything else is the same, it's still pretty amazing.
But I think of how you met your parents in heaven, that's something really cool. That would be on the top of my list.
Yeah.
But knowing them from this earth, you say that you're not going to say something that's going to upset one of them, and then there's the corruptibility is gone.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I think I think you're hitting on the same concept. We can't understand what that would be like, but what we can trust is that whoever we encounter in heaven, when we have left this world, when Christ comes and recreates a new heaven and a new earth, we will not be able to say those things and do those things and act in those ways.
I meant the corruptibility could still be there.
Yeah, that's the, I,
I
What
meant
we
the other
can
way around.
understand.
that's what our reward is that the corruptibility won't be there. And that's the piece we can't understand.
Yeah, you understand that.
Yeah, right. We can't imagine it. We can't imagine what it's like to live in a world with not just one that isn't corrupt, but one that isn't corruptible. Yeah, because along with a new heaven and a new earth, and the gift that God gives to us in creating that goes right alongside that the final condemnation of Satan, who is the one who deceives. You know, this is a spiritual battle that we're a part of. And we're not the most powerful part of either army. So the corruptibility, you know, the what we're made aware of in the Garden of Eden is that we're vulnerable, that things out there can hurt us. And Satan was available. And for that reason, maybe that's the only source of pain and suffering. We don't know that for sure, but I certainly I could suggest that the only threat that we had in the garden would have been Satan. And so that's the one thing that will not be part of the equation when Christ comes again and creates a new heaven and a new earth. Part of that creation includes, in a way that we won't ever completely understand, but people will still try to describe it, the complete elimination of Satan's influence in our world. There will be no Satan. There will be no temptation. There will be no
There
this.
goes Halloween.
Well, yeah.
Profound,
Great comment.
profound.
Christmas will be changed quite a bit too.
And then Easter.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's no big deal now.
Yeah.
You're right. Sorry, Santa. Your days are numbered. We're not going to go so far as to say that you're Satan. However, when Satan's not around, you won't be needed.
But he's an anagram.
That's right. Your service is no longer required. Does that mean the Steelers won't be there or the Browns won't be there? I think for most people in America, that's the main question. Is it?
These parts.
Yeah, absolutely. So having talked about that, then no one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or devoted to one and despise the other. You can't serve both God and money. What do you think?
It ties in with everything else.
Yeah,
It
it
wraps
does.
it all up. It ties everything together that, you know, there's money, which isn't in itself evil, and there's God who in himself is perfect, but you can't serve money and serve God, put it that way.
And really, you could take that to worldly gains, you know, and not just money,
Yeah.
but
Just like the love of money is the root of all evil. Well, the love of money, not money itself.
Right.
but
It's all kinds of evil.
you serve it.
It's a variety, not just the generic evil, but a lot of different ways. Well, I think too, it's important to look at the action. No one can serve two masters. That what Jesus is not saying, and what the church I think has often gotten mixed up, is it is not a suggestion that money itself is evil. It is a recognition that those resources are to serve God's kingdom. We don't serve money. Money serves us. We use it as a tool. We don't become an instrument of that resource. We don't become an instrument of money. We don't allow ourselves to have our lives guided by that. It is a resource for us to use. And the same way, we don't use God. God uses us. We are serving God, and money is to serve us. If we get it right, when we are serving God, imperfectly, yes. But I don't know what that means exactly. I just know for myself that if it was, if it was kind of like the weather report percentage of rain, what is it? What does 50% rain mean? Half the water's dry and half of it isn't? Does that mean that there's 2 inches between drops instead of 1 inch between drops? You're like, what does 50%, is it 50% of the space covered with rain, or is it 50% of the time that it's raining? Or is there 50% as much water coming down during that time? It's really
I
ambiguous.
mean, they don't have a clue.
It means, right, neither do I. Neither do I. But the reality is, when we are to be serving God, I don't know exactly how to measure that. I just know when I look at my life, that percentage of am I serving God has increased since I found Christ. I'm not there. And I don't know what it looks like exactly, and I wouldn't want to describe it any more closely than that. But I do know that my ability to serve God completely has increased in the time that I've tried to serve Him. I'm not there, certainly. But the idea that we can serve God and that we can continue to strive toward that we can allow ourselves, we're not going to be perfect. This isn't a black and white. It isn't either you serve God or you don't. And if you fall down once and don't serve God, if you disappoint Him once, you're done. It's important not to take these contrasts are given to us, but they should not be seen as either or. It just because once I serve, I allow myself to serve money instead of God, that doesn't mean I'm done for the equation. Like I can still imperfectly serve God more and improve in that. I can shift my influence away from one and toward the other. So it's stated in absolutes, but in reality, the shift is one of growing faith. It's progressive sanctification. More and more parts of our body, parts of our lives. If you think of your life as a pizza, and I think everybody should, frankly.
Continue.
If you think of your, it works, right? If you think of your life as a pizza, whether it's a chocolate chip, whatever the topping is,
Oh, yeah, we made
Oh,
that.
yeah.
peanut butter crust and chocolate chips on top.
Oh, my God.
See, here's the thing. If you get a chocolate chip pizza, you want chips on the whole thing, right? Not just a few. You know, now you could do it half and half, like Jim's half gets chocolate chips and
It doesn't go on top of the sauces, does it?
no, it's a peanut butter crust. It's a peanut butter crust. It's not.
Now I'm becoming confused.
Oh, yeah.
This is really a really bad illustration.
This
Just
study's taking an interesting turn here.
just imagine that putting something on a pizza, you cover the whole pizza with that topping. Can be a whole lot or it can be a whole little, but the reality is if you just cover a little bit of it with the topping in the center, you're not really touching all of it. And if you try to protect one part of it, you can't say it's a pepperoni pizza if you don't put it on the whole pizza. Our faith is the same way. We need to allow ourselves to serve God and allow Christ to reform every aspect of our lives. We cannot compartmentalize and say on Sundays for an hour and a half, I'm going to be Christ-like. The rest of the week, I'm going to do what I want.
Right.
This is this duality here that you can't serve them both is not to suggest that we can flip a switch and while we're in church, we have to be good, but we don't have to be good any other time. Nor does it suggest that the only way we can do it is 100% perfect behavior or 0%. It is a continuum, but the rhetorical device of the contrast helps for us to understand that.
Verse 23 really is so profound. The line, if then the light within you is darkness,
Yeah.
well, something.
How great is that darkness?
I don't want that. You know, like that convicts me. Like, I
Yeah.
don't want my light to just be dark. You know, like that,
Yeah.
there is no light, you know?
Yeah.
How
And-
great is it when there's no light in a person? Like that
Yeah.
is, I don't want to get to that place.
Yeah. And if you look at that light and darkness as corrupted versus incorrupted, that,
They're the people that make your hair stand up.
yeah, except for Jeff. They made Jeff's hair go the other way. He didn't stand up and laid down.
Could have been walked away.
He fled. I'm going.
But
I
that
hear.
is- I mean, that is really profound, and really, how great is that darkness? It's so
Yeah.
true. So true.
Yeah.
It's stunning, really.
I mean, it's sad, but there are times when we've had at least glimpses in history of people who truly are just evil. We had the obvious Adolf Hitler ones, but there is that it is possible for that darkness to be really dark, and yet at the same time, Christ would say that all of us can be saved.
Well, I think that for me, when we were talking about that, I think that when we're trying to strive in that direction, we'll have more opportunities to serve.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I think that's part of God's plan. We can't get to the point where we're serving all the time if we've never served.
right.
But if we serve once, then there may be another opportunity, and
And-
another opportunity after that.
Yeah. And I think too, once we start with the serving, we begin to see the reward and the benefit. I mean,
Right.
it is better for us. We do feel more at home in our world when we're doing that kind of thing. So yeah, I think you're right. It opens that door and it builds on itself.
Right.
You get one chance to serve, and that opens your eyes to 10 more ways to serve and opportunities to serve. And it also helps us in shifting our priorities. If
Right.
you give up a little bit of time now to serve, and you find that behaving with integrity and representing the good news, you discover that a grace-based life is a blessing. Then the 1 hour you serve becomes the possibility of serving a day, and a day becomes a week, and a week becomes a month, and a month becomes a lifetime, as we continue to exercise that, to live in that light. Yeah, that's how we grow, right? So we got a few more minutes to jump into the do not worries. Therefore, I tell you, don't worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not, I have to say this now. You remember Paul Pendleton, obviously. Well, a good friend of mine that from Macedonia that was a very active go-getter kind of a guy, kind of retired as school superintendent, but also started a couple of businesses on his own. So he was fully actualized, and some friends of theirs convinced them to go to Florida in the wintertime for a week or 10 days, something like that. Maybe it was longer than that.
Oh,
Maybe
like 2 months.
it's like a month. Yeah, it was like 11 weeks. Or so. It was a long time. So anyway, I said to Paul, "How are you going to handle this?" And he said, "Oh, it's going to be tough." One time, I called him while he was down there to talk about something else, and I said, "So how is it?" And he said, "Well, all we worry about is what we're going to eat and drink, and where we're going to drink next, and where we're going to eat at 4, and what we're going to have for dinner. And while we are finishing our dinner at 4 o'clock, we start talking about where we're going to have breakfast." and I said, "Thank you. You just convinced me that I don't ever want to go. Not that I ever did think I'd want to go, but that to me, and that's I don't know that it was that extreme, but from Paul's perspective, it felt that way." So moving on. Is not life more important than food, and the body more important than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to his life? Do we think anybody would argue with that? Believer or non-believer, it doesn't matter what your faith orientation is. If you're 15 years old or 18 years old or older, is there anybody that's going to argue that worrying cannot add time to your life? And if that was a good enough argument, why do we do it? I mean, if we know that it's true,
It actually depletes your life.
yeah,
It goes the other way.
yeah.
It takes away
Yeah.
from your life.
So why do we worry? Why do we pretend if it was Alfred E. Newman? What, me worry? Yeah.
Well, there's
because the King James says, which of you by taking thought can add 1 cubit to his stature? And I had a note in the NIV that it referred to that too, said, or a single cubit to your height.
Well, you
So it's
can,
like,
if you get drywall stilts, you can add a cubit to your
Yeah,
height.
yeah.
However, for me, that's gonna not end well, so it's not a sustainable cubit. It's just a temporary cubit. But the point is here, not, not again to say that we are not like the birds. However, if God created and cares for and provides systems for, that it's important to look at the birds of the air do not sow or reap, but they do gather and they do eat. I mean, there is some agency on the part of these animals that he's talking about. They're not laying around as couch potato birds. So there is some activity involved with it. It's about the anxiety around it that matters.
We are in a family group where it's once a week, we meet with this on Skype or whatever it is. Oh, Zoom. But to talk about people who are relatives of recovering addicts and things like that.
Uh-huh.
And she keeps talking about the what ifs.
Uh-huh.
And that's where we get the worry. The
Yeah.
what if, well, what if this, what if that?
What if that? Yeah. Yes.
Our minds, because our eyes are not as bright as they should be, we
Yeah.
see the darkness.
Yeah.
And we get afraid of the darkness. And then we're so worried that what if this, what if that? And then,
Yeah.
it just builds. And that's why we worry.
Yeah.
We
And-
think, what if God puts us through something like, maybe it's supposed to make us better, but it's gonna hurt a lot. We don't want that. Like that might be even though we do want that, we should want that.
A common one is somebody has something wrong with them and they say, I don't want to go to the doctor because they might be cancer.
Right.
Not going to the doctor isn't going to make it not cancer,
Right.
but they're worried
Yeah.
about it, so they don't want to go, they don't want to find out.
I wanna know.
Well, and again, we have to recognize that Satan's spiritual warfare in our lives is based entirely on corrupting what is good. There's nothing new there's nothing that is entirely evil. There's only corruptibility. Satan can't create. He has no capacity for that. And so on the one hand, you talk about the birds being fed, they have to go out and eat. There is a reward to that. If eating didn't offer some reward, they would stop eating and they would die. And the same thing with worry. We do need to be industrious. If you're going to plant a garden, it's going to take some work. If you're going to harvest crops, it's going to take some work. You got to prepare the food. I mean, it's not, and that exercise, that physical exercise, and the intensity of it, and when storm clouds are coming and you want to get the hay in the barn because you don't want it to get wet, you do get a little bit amped up, and you do act a little bit faster, and you do work a little bit harder, and you can push yourself a little bit more. All of those rewards can be corrupted. And worry is something that becomes very addictive because it generates this intensity that goes along with activity. And the same way that you can become addicted to a substance, you can become addicted to the release of endorphins and the release of adrenaline in your system. And I've read a number of accounts of people, wise, intelligent, hardworking people who would only pursue a life of crime because it was the only thing that was exciting. They didn't steal because they needed to. In their own character, I haven't known these people personally. I've read their accounts, their autobiographies. In their own description, they certainly had the skills and the gifts. And lifetime criminals are not unintelligible people. They have this energy, and several times they've described the reason they continued in a life of crime was because it offered that excitement, that adrenaline. There was nothing else that offered that. Now, I don't suggest that we are all at that level in terms of worry, but the admonition not to worry and pay attention that we're not passive. We need to find an active balance.
I think that goes along with the emotional continuum
Yeah.
worry is on. It's okay to be concerned, to have honest concern about people, that's scriptural, love your neighbor, have concern for, others. But when Satan pushes you to cross the line, what is needless worry, concern, you go along, you're concerned, and that's good. And all of a sudden you start worrying. And that's where it crosses that line in that continuum.
Yeah,
And that's where it becomes, you're not living in the moment
yeah,
of being of living what God has for you. And you just live in that moment
yeah.
rather than, go out farther on the continuum.
It's interesting. I like the way you described that, because it also, for me internally, I realize there are people that God's put in our lives to care for, and it's obedient and caring up until a point. But then when you cross that line, wherever it is, of now believing that their eternity is based entirely on you, and you start leaving God out of the equation, and you stop, you make yourself the linchpin, and you leave behind God. Then that's when you kind of cross that line. Is
When
it?
you stop yielding to God
Yeah,
to help you manage that concern
yeah,
and start taking it on yourself.
right.
That's where
Mhm.
you
Uh-huh.
cross over, you worry.
Yeah. Like if God says, okay, listen, you've done your part here.
Yeah.
It's time to let go and let them, either somebody else help out or whatever. Yeah, I like that. That's a good way of understanding it. That there is that part that is necessary and godly. We certainly don't want to be apathetic, which would appear to be the flip side of worry.
I don't care.
Yeah, and we know that that's not accurate. That's not what God calls us to do. Yeah, so that, how do we engage that? And I think it's a lifetime challenge.
I get overwhelmed, and then I think about, I don't have to be this way, because God's supposed to be in this too.
Yeah,
And then you let God into you and you feel relaxed. I mean, it takes that worry down a level when you
Yeah.
realize
Mhm.
that
yeah,
you need to get God into this, not just you. It
Wha-
does, it totally does.
When we were in Cuba, I marveled, and honestly, these people inspired me. They don't have a vehicle. They live day to day with the food. They get up and they know they need to get to Havana or wherever. They don't have a way, but they figure it out. People are like hitchhiking and picking up, strangers pick up one another. That is their daily life. They would want us to pick them up. They didn't know us from Adam,
Yeah.
like they just, are you going this way? I need to do this thing here. That's their day. I could not live like that, but they are so faithful.
yeah,
To let God, I'm not sure every one of them was a Christian, but the Christians that we knew were very much, like, it's just
Yeah.
inspiring to think they don't even know really where their next meal is coming from. They don't have a car to get them where they
yeah,
imagine
right.
living like that, but that is truly a daily
Their
faith.
priorities.
Yeah.
So
it
it's a
makes you
model
realize
of yielding to God and living
Yes.
with God in the moment.
Yeah,
It's unbelievable, but
Not
it's,
even the next
for
hour,
them,
right
it's-
in the moment.
yeah.
it's truly a day-to-day trust.
And we had that much more in Zimbabwe when I started there. There's less of that now. Things are becoming more stable, but there are a few godly men who have said, just in passing, we don't want to lose that notion of depending on God every day for everything. That there's something spiritually healthy about having to really ask God every day for things, and not get to a point where you start taking for granted those things. And I think too, the other the piece of it that's, I think, critical for me is that it isn't the activity, it's my participation in the activity. It's not necessarily that something is right or wrong. It isn't the suggestion that we should all wear the same uniform so that we don't have to think about our clothes, or that we should eat the same meal because we don't have to think about our food. It's when do, like Mary Jo was saying, when do I cross that line? When does it become more about me than it is about God? And one of the things that I've learned recently, really, probably since intentionally, since I preached on it a couple of months ago, just in prayer saying, wait a minute, God, what part of this is mine? What part of this, whatever this mess, what part of this is mine? And what part of it's yours? And where do I need to, it certainly doesn't work perfectly, but being in the habit of doing that when it comes to either a full schedule or issues that seem to be unresolvable or mutually exclusive or things that you, whatever. I mean, all those things that can go wrong, the things that can generate worry, to at least be able to stop and say, wait a minute, what part of this is mine and what part isn't, and letting go of it then. And we have a number of conversations about what he thinks is mine, what I think is mine.
Well, you said something in the first service yesterday about there's nothing I can do about it. You know, if there's something where you really have no control,
Yeah,
why worry about it? I mean,
right.
there's nothing you can do
Yeah. Yeah.
except pray for the best.
And once we recognize that, why don't we act on it?
Right.
And we all do. We all know that there are things that we can say intellectually, there's nothing I can do about it, but that doesn't mean we walk away from it and leave it alone. We continue to obsess. We keep looking for, well, maybe there's something I can do about it. We declare there's nothing I can do about it. Well, maybe there is. I have to look again. Wait a minute. Is there nothing I can do about it, or is there something I can do about it? And we all challenge that. Thank you, Mel. You're- Well, thank you all. Jeff, would you close us with a prayer?
Sure. Heavenly Father, we're just grateful to be able to be here and be able to open your word and to study and to have these discussions and open up to each other and to you. And so, Lord, just bless each one of us, continue to bless each one of us as we continue to try to walk in your way. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all. We survived without Tom.
Barely, but we made it.
3 alarms go off.
Linda Humphreys commented, I think worry ages a person.
It does, yeah.
I have to believe that one.
It's like Lynn said, it's the opposite of lengthening your life, it shortens your life.
I think Jean isn't feeling very well, so let's keep her in our prayers. I did
Who?
notice yesterday
Jean?
on Facebook post, she felt too lousy to even come